everybody. This is Nina G, and this is another edition of the Comedy Time Capsule on May 16th, 2020. And today, Michael Beers is joining me. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Nina. Thanks for having me in your capsule.
Yeah, thank you for joining me in it. Can you say a little bit about yourself and anything you would like to plug?
Oh, you know I can, Nina. Yeah, I'm Michael Beers. I'm a comedian advocate, which I think is a title I stole from Nina, in Missoula, Montana. So I've been doing stand-up comedy since 2001 and working in and around independent living centers for almost that long. And yeah, I think as far as plugs, there's not a lot of comedy plugs right now. But you know, there is a few projects. I think the most important one would be, or the one we hope is most important, is the impending short bus project, which is basically in a very shortened version, people like Nina and I jumping in a short yellow school bus with a lift for the wheelchair and going about our mission to make that cool again. Or I shouldn't say again. It's never been cool. Like, that's kind of the point of it all, is that it is and when I was in school, it was the polar opposite to what was cool.
And can you tell, because people may just find this and they may just be like, oh, comedy, I'm gonna watch this. Yeah. What are comics like us? What does that mean?
What does what mean? I'm sorry.
Comedians like Nina and I.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good point. So where others justify being a comedian by waiting tables or getting involved in the food service industry, comics like Nina and I have developed other side hustles around, I would say, civil rights and teaching. So me personally, before I ever met Nina, like, I'd found advocacy and, specifically from a disability perspective, and comedy right around the same time in my life. And I always, for those first few years, I really viewed them as separate. So it was, hey, comedy is my passion. It's where I see my future financially, and where I want my motivations. And working at the independent living center was the day job. It was the regular source of income that paid the money until this hypothetical making it happens as far as comedy. And the more the years went by, the more those Venn diagram got closer and closer, to a point where I no longer have an ambition to succeed in comedy separate from the advocacy. I don't see myself saying, okay, I've reached this much success with comedy, so I can leave these other endeavors behind. I think yeah.
What's the Venn diagram look like now?
So it's comedy and stand-up, more specifically stand-up comedy and advocacy. I think around disability, but it's that side has gotten more broad. So I think I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, in that it's, yes, I think like disability is always going to be where I think externally people look at me and say, well, that Michael's an advocate for people with disabilities. But more and more, it's I like the idea of being an advocate for misfits and the fringe, which, that might, for a lot of people with disability, is what puts us on the fringe. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of misfits out there that don't necessarily fit into a label, and building community and space for people like that, I think, and for people like me, I think is something that I like. I like the idea of attacking civil rights more from the social aspect. Like it's there's plenty of work that has been done and needs to be done around legislation for physical equality and socioeconomic, but there's so much that stems from what's preventing people, if they have the same access to an area, because there's a ramp or there's no longer a sign that says whites only. If they have that physical access, there's nothing that legislation can do to make those two talk to each other. And I like that aspect of advocacy more, and I don't know that we're doing enough of it intentionally.
And so this is kind of like you have the laws, but it's winning the hearts and minds kind of thing.
Yeah, I was on a call the other day, and I think I don't know if the capsule is the right place for it, but I think you and I could talk for a while about the addressing loneliness as the number one barrier to people with disabilities. Because I know that with young people, as much as I'm educated on legislation and healthcare, which are so important in the next election, but if you're talking to a young person with especially an invisible disability and sort of non-apparent, and or even people with more apparent disabilities, at that age, that high school age, in their early 20s, intellectually they get why healthcare is so important, but if they're being honest, they're like, I'm lonely, and the only touch I get is from a personal care attendant, or I've just never figured out socially how to make those connections with people, and that's I don't know where that fits in the hierarchy of needs, but it's certainly important to a lot of young people. And then you see it like right away when they find something that like makes them feel like, and that was true of me when I found somebody that said, a community that said unapologetically, "You're with me." That was huge. That was a game changer for me to hear people say that.
Can you say what that was at the time and what that like your age and all that stuff?
I was early 20s. I would say like comedy was definitely one that, right, I performed my first time my senior year in high school. And it's so funny because it was a school project. But back in that is the late 90s, early 2000s, my mom actually had to drive me in the minivan to the dirtiest bar in Missoula so I could meet with my mentor, who is an improv comic and an actor. He'd never done stand-up, but mom and I joke that she had the orange slices in a bag for me and all that. But I think that feeling of like I belong in a space really happened at 19 when I performed stand-up, because I was so nervous going in, and you hear this from a lot of comics, but as soon as I got that first laugh, I immediately felt like myself, more so than I'd ever done, and realized that this is a medium where for the first time in my life, I was the tallest and loudest person in the room, and the most listened to. So that for me was big. And then a few years later, I remember being at a independent living conference, April, Associated Programs for Independent Living. And I was 21, and I'd gone with my supervisor, who was in her 60s. And of course, she, showed me around and did a great job of mentoring, but, she was in bed by 8 o'clock. So I was kind of left to wander Savannah, Georgia by myself, because I was deathly afraid of introducing myself to a group or to say, "Hey, can I hang with you?" But they had a talent show that last night of the conference that my boss signed me up for. without me knowing. She told me the day of. She's like, "Oh, by the way, I signed you up to do comedy in front of 400 people." And I was like, okay, like, shit. And it was like 10 minutes, but it went really well. Like it was, and I remember it being in the lobby, and every night there was like one or two people and chair users that would play guitar and sing in the lounge at the hotel. And I never, like I said, I never had the uh, the ball, the gumption or the guts or the balls or whatever you want to say to go and like introduce myself. So that night after the talent show, I was so jazzed. It was that, hey, I did a good thing as a performer, like energy, but I had nowhere to go. So I saw them. There were probably 30 people in the lounge listening to these two guys in manual chairs play guitar and sing. And I was hiding behind a fake plant in the lobby, just like, looking. And one of them, Billy Altum, like, it was a surreal moment, like slow motion. They're like waving me in, and they said, "Hey, sit down." And he ordered me a beer. And to anybody that came in that little sphere that night, I didn't end up talking to Billy or that group very much, but they would made a point to, it felt like they were making a point to just let everybody know, like, "Oh, this is Mike, he's with us." And then immediately, like, so yeah, that story didn't end until 4 a.m. on the balcony watching the sun come up with a bunch of disability rights advocates who are very social and very loud. So yeah, and it was, but yeah, I do remember that very distinctly as, a cool moment.
Can you say a little bit about BASE and what happens there? Because you've integrated it in the comedy stuff and the activist stuff. Very concrete things that most of us have not done.
Well, it's a BASE is a mixtape of experiences and people over the years doing comedy and advocacy. I think would be, if there was a label for that overlap on the Venn diagram, BASE would be it. BASE would be that oval in the middle, because it is so BASE. The reason it's called BASE is it's a community center that is a program of our independent living center here in Missoula. And we called it BASE. It's not an acronym, which is usually a prerequisite for being a social justice program. But it's called BASE because everybody in the world almost has played some version of the game of tag. And the first thing that happens when you play tag, or you make up a game when you're a kid, and this hasn't changed from like when we were kids to, now when there's iPads and all this technology, if kids are making up their own game, there's always BASE. There's always a, hey, if stuff gets weird, put your hand on this spot and nobody can mess with you. And sometimes it's the couch, sometimes it's the monkey bars. But the understanding is that you can go there whenever you need it, but you can never stay. You always have to go back and play the game, hopefully with a new energy from being at BASE. So one of the initial thoughts was, wouldn't that be nice as a young adult or somebody of any age if life is the game you're playing, to know where to run and put your hand and say, no, I'm safe here. I don't have to wear a mask. I can be as creative as I want. I can learn, I can teach, but I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not in this spot. So that's the story behind the name. And it really came from a place of being a part of programs like you've been a part of, Nina, like youth leadership forums that are 1 week experiences for young people with disabilities that are so life altering, as I went through as a delegate. And again, it was one of those moments of like, oh my gosh, I could never advocate for this before in my life because I didn't know this is what I was missing. And so, yeah, when we look at students and we say, what do you need? What do you want? What do you want to advocate for? They're so far removed from that feeling of belonging and confidence that we don't know the words to tell people what we want. So, but those are in April, and there's so many programs that do great things like that, but they're 1 week experiences or they're 3 days, and then students go off into the rest of their lives, and now they know what they were missing, but they don't have access to it. And
it can be very bittersweet, because for me, going to the stuttering conferences, it's always like, wow, there's this thing and it changed my life, and now I can't go to it for another year. But you find other ways to substitute that or to nurse you along through throughout the year.
Yeah. And the other big thing about bass that I personally dig, I think the conversation really happened around just, I would say, Mary Olson, who was a friend of mine for a long time working in IL, and then comics and just scatterings of people that were all recognizing the same thing. But it was also very important that bass not be that program for those people. So yeah, it's an all abilities space. So it really does draw from, all walks of life in Missoula, disability or not. But, obviously we're going to be more accommodating and put more weight in accommodation than other programs. But yeah, it wasn't all premeditated. But it builds community and relationships based on interest of individuals and not their label. So I think that's one thing you and I have talked about a lot, I think, and other is it's the only place this logic exists is in social work, where you can look at two individuals, in our case it's disability, and say, oh my God, you're in this age range and you have a spinal cord injury. You're in this age range and you have a spinal cord injury. You two are probably going to get along. This is going to be your mentor. And that's not how life works. Nina, you and I probably met each other because we both have disabilities and we're in that circle.
Yeah.
But you're not my friend because of disability. You're my friend because of common interests and all those other things. So
yeah. And so can you say a little bit about like what the programs at base look like and what you guys do? Because I've been to open mics there, I've been to gaming nights there, I've been to art activities, I've been to potlucks, I've been to just improv stuff, and I was only there for like 3 days and all that stuff happened.
3 days. That's so funny to hear somebody say, like, oh my God, that sounds great. Yeah, so we a big part of it when we got started was it was based in comedy, mostly because I'm a comic, and the pool of volunteers we were leaning on to help with this, because they were we couldn't get a lot of other center staff because they didn't have the time, and just happened to be comics or people around that scene. So our biggest probably our biggest program right off the bat was an improv class. So we do all abilities improv. So and we do a class once a week that's just improv, but it really, for students, we focus on communication through improv. So the idea that life is improv, we just don't call it that. So why not have a space where you can build that skill? So if you can be in a scene, you might never perform comedy, but if you can be in a scene where one person's the Hulk and the other person's Sir Isaac Newton sitting next to Donald Trump, all of a sudden a job interview or an IEP meeting isn't so intimidating because you've had this experience. So we do all abilities yoga. We've had dance classes. We've had origami meditations. We've had probably our most popular program right now is a professional wrestling group, where we don't actually wrestle because liability said no, but everybody makes up a character, and you decide if you're a heel or a hero, and we come up with storylines, and we, in COVID right now, instead of doing shows as these characters, everybody that's a part of the group does a promo video every week that we put on Facebook. So, calling people out, kind of continuing those storylines. And again, it's been great. The motivation was just for 30-something comics to be able to get paid to do wrestling stuff. But there's so many soft skills that get hit when you frame it that way with students. They have to learn the technology now. They have to learn, how to put stories together, and that skill. I don't know the name for it, but there's a skill that people develop of, hey, this is how I give my peers shit or give people a bad time, but don't cross a line where it's mean. It's almost like supportive shit giving. That when you see it done right, it's such a valuable tool, but it's very nuanced. So.
And do you think, and that is, I was just in I did a book reading yesterday, and there was Q&A, and somebody asked me how I got so thick-skinned. And I was like, I don't think I am. And I think that's also part of it, is understanding what pisses you off and how to respond to that is a skill. And you're saying through play, because this is play, whether it's improv or wrestling games, that you can better understand that skill, because play helps you build skills.
Yeah.
And you've seen that translate into other things. And then also being able to draw on that, because you also mentor a lot of the people that you work with too.
Yeah, it's been cool. I really do. I watched what is it, Crip Camp finally.
That's my friend's film. My friend lives up that hill over there.
I know, and I had no context when you introduced me to him at the Jewish Arts Center, and we must have talked for 2 hours about this and that. Like, no, I mean, I was like, that's just a really cool friend of Nina's that I got to hang out with. And then
that friend may get an Academy Award. I don't know. Yeah. I think it film's that good. So.
And talk about positive shit giving. I watched that because you gave me shit for not seeing it. But it really, to me, it made me think about a lot of the work that we do at base, and like you and I've talked about doing, and you do with the people you work with, is that camp that they all went to is where a lot of the people that we point to as game changers, that's where they got confidence.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Judy got confidence, was at that camp. And that camp had nothing to do with leadership. Camp had nothing to do with finding your benefits, filling out forms. A lot, because that stuff didn't exist. It was one, but the camp was just about belonging and building confidence, like other people have access to and don't even think about. And but that led to 504 sit-ins. That led to the ADA in part. But it's almost like that the role that camp played has been put aside or forgotten about as a piece. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of the young people have now. They have 504, they have ADA, but they don't have that camp experience. So what good are these rights unless they're paired with a certain amount of confidence to be able to? So yeah, that was a great fun.
And so going back to comedy for you, comedy is in part kind of where you found that, both in mainstream but also in disability.
Yeah, comedy's Yeah, comedy is where my confidence comes from. Like any shred of confidence that I have has some origin in being able to be funny, whether it was on a stage or.
Can you say a little bit about, because you mentioned that it was a high school project, was that the first time that you were like, oh, there's this thing, stand-up comedy, or was it something you'd always loved? And why would somebody in high school let you go to a bar and do comedy?
Yeah, I was always a fan of stand up. It wasn't until my sophomore year in high school that it ever crossed my mind that it was something that I could do. And I think a lot of it had to do with confidence. A lot of it had to do with living in Montana. It just doesn't seems like something you can be a fan of, but not something that you could ever do because, especially then. But my acting teacher in sophomore year, I'd taken theater 2 years, and I kind of enjoyed it just because, in retrospect, it was a class of misfits. There was no uh, there was really no hierarchy because I think theater kind of draws that out. But
And were you in special ed? And by the way, this is my second interview that I've directly asked a comic if they were in special ed as a kid,
yeah.
because I think
Hmm.
it's that misfitness. Often, like for me, I know that the resource room that I was in as a student had some of those origins of comedy, and I wonder if you
Yeah.
had a similar experience or just mainstream throughout everything.
No, there's no. I mean, it's such a sexy term now, but it doesn't get more intersectional than special ed in high school. Like you kind of have to deal with everybody, and everybody builds community out of not belonging to anything. But yeah, I was special ed from kindergarten all the way through. I took a lot of mainstream classes, but I missed a lot, and there was some reading deficits. So yeah, I definitely did my time. Uh, and
And
yeah,
so were there
uh,
fits in both things, in both in drama and in special ed, and were the misfits in drama a different kind of misfit than what you had already
there
uh,
were.
realized?
Yeah, there was a couple of us that overlapped, special ed and theater, but a lot of it was, yeah, we identified with the theater students not because of special ed, but just being on the fringe. And I think that's something that you and I have both found is that uh, the number of stand up comics that are or comics of any type that are diagnosed as having some kind of disability or were never diagnosed. Like it's a huge population. I think there's, um, yeah. So a lot of the comics we started working with at base, strictly because they were comics and they identified with the project, we ended up, months or years later, they were on the spectrum or they have a reading disability or, something like that. But that's not why we started working together. It just, created a venue that they were comfortable talking about it. Whereas, you and I kind of just upfront right away with it. But but yeah, my sophomore year in high school, my theater teacher said very supportively that I wasn't the best actor. Uh, but he said, have you ever tried stand up? Thought of trying stand up because he recognized he's like your timing is incredible. And so that was one teacher and one afternoon, but that stuck in my head. So 2 years later, I made it my project. So yeah, that's when I first started thinking about it, and then after I performed one time, it's been all I could think about for almost 20 years.
And so you've been doing comedies for 20 years now?
Almost 20. So 2001. Yeah, May 2001 was the first time I got on stage. So
Wow. Wow. Your
yeah,
20th anniversary is coming.
I know it's yeah, it's scary.
It is. Okay, let me see. There's so much to ask because you have so many areas that you could go into. Let me ask you this, since we're still kind of on this. Like I've seen some comics, like the old school way is to kind of like make fun of yourself, and I think like there's when you are from a community that is different from the mainstream, there's a couple ways that you can make jokes. One is to make the audience feel comfortable, and the other is to make them feel uncomfortable, but get them into comfort. And because sometimes comics who have a disability may kind of make fun of themselves, and then the audience is like, oh, I'm really comfortable laughing at that because I want to say that, but they externalize it. So like now, oh good, yay, I agree with that. But then there's calling the audience out on their shit. Like, where do you fall with all of this?
Oh yeah. So I remember Aaron Roos was the theater student at the university that did improv that initially taught me how to be on stage and helped me with my first 20-minute set, which is the other part that, like, growing up in Montana, when he asked me to do a 20-minute set the first time, there was nothing in me that told me that was not normal. It wasn't until years later that I find out that most open mics are 3, if not 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I was like, damn, I had to do 20 my first time. But I remember those early conversations. He said, one, he's like, I'm glad you're funny because I can't make you funny. Like I can teach you a lot of stuff, but if you're not funny, I can't. And then he's like, you're going to have to say something about your arm right off the bat. And from his perspective, it was making the audience comfortable. And the end game was that if you make them comfortable, then you can go wherever you want with your jokes because they won't be as focused on, your arm. And so I did that for years, and I still do that depending on, and I don't know if it's me profiling, but if the audience is older, they have to bring up my disability. It seems like I have to bring up my disability sooner. Whereas younger audiences, I can wait. Like the longer you wait, the bigger the payoff because you kind of build that anxiety with the audience, and then you finally address it, and they're like, oh. But I talk about with students, especially younger comics, if they are willing to listen to me drink coffee and sit in my rocking chair. That self-deprecation is a great tool to both make people more comfortable, but to also educate. But personally, I try never to cross that line where I'm putting myself down or giving you permission to put me down. And I think I've found that line because I've crossed it. But generally, it's making fun of situations. So I'm not making fun of my arm, but just like, being any other minority gives comics a different perspective. This gives me a different perspective. Your stutter gives you a different perspective. And that's the story that we're telling. It's not an effort to give you permission. I think Chappelle talks about that a lot with his, this is why I have to go to Africa, because he saw that the education starting to bleed into, okay, this is education and satire for 80% of you, but then 20% of you are taking this as an excuse or a reason or permission for you to talk about these things. And I think that's I try not to do that. Like, comedy is also a very personal thing, so I can, and we've talked about that with language. Like, it's hard to come out, like, we know language we're not going to use, because we have our reasons, but I don't know, to professionally go to another comedian and say, don't say that, is I've had it go really well, but I've also had it go really bad. So I'm trying to...
And, like, can you kind of, because I don't think I don't know any other place or space where disabled people can talk about this. Is there, like, what makes it okay for someone else to make fun of you? And like the example that I often cite is Dave, Mean Dave, when he introduces me, or, you know, because he is usually the host when I'm on a show, oftentimes, not always. But then when he hosts and then I go up, and then when he comes back, he says, "What can I say about Nina that wouldn't take her longer to say about herself?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's cool. And like once me and Dave got into it with a comic who then got up on stage and like said some shit about us, and Dave just started to talk shit, and then I was like, "Dave, can you start drinking again so that you can go off on this guy?" Because I know like a drunk Mean Dave would have just ripped him apart.
Yeah.
And so I was able to make fun of his sobriety that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can verbalize this. So can you verbalize that for me?
So I think it gets back to a little bit what we talked about, that unnamed skill of how do I give people shit without alienating who they are. And I don't know where I picked it up, but I'm very, very sensitive to people that fuck it up and do it wrong. And I think that's this is going to be a bit of a humble brag. So just trigger warning if you're allergic to humble brags. But I've seen it, and I think I learned it because I see it from other people. I think I've seen it from you. I've seen it from, you know, people I call mentors that don't know that I call them that. But and then I also see like younger comics or even younger students that they try to do what I've done. They try to get up and say that thing that's edgy, but isn't putting anybody down, and they can't do it. And then when they do it, it's offensive, and it turns more people off than it turns, you know, like the cost benefit isn't there. And I think I have the skill because I've messed it up enough times. But yeah, it is that skill, and I think the relationship has a lot to do with it. Like I would never say anything, but I would never make the joke Dave did if I just met you as a comic, and I'm sure he wouldn't. Knowing Dave, he wouldn't have if it was an open micer with a stutter. He wouldn't make that joke because the relationship isn't there. But yeah, we can do that, like, you know.
Yeah, no, I kind of remember when I'm driving the both of you to Sacramento, and there's a bag of grapes, and I had you guys both on me.
Yeah, that was yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed that intervention. But no, and the other part of that too, when you describe that, it makes me think. I don't get as upset when because I think we've probably both been at open mics where we didn't know anybody, and or we met the MC right beforehand, and they're immediately like, you know, he was like, "Oh, I'm going to say something about his hand in his introduction," or you know, maybe they'll say it. And it's just not. And it makes me glad that comic doesn't have this hand because their material about it sucks. Like I mean, like you know, this is why I have this and you don't, because your jokes, you do like office jokes about this hand, and it's like, oh, all right, everybody, give a hand to our next comic. No, seriously, give him a hand. I'm like, okay, that was a very entry level joke. That would have been clever if you were 4. So then he just have to go up and be like, okay, this is how you do this. This is how you talk about all of this.
Oh, Mike, that's why I love you and I miss you so much because that just puts that's the whole thing right there. That's the whole thing. Thank you.
I do find myself checking other people, like we mentioned. Like I would never. I think John Howard, who works at Base and is another comic with a disability. But when he first started doing stand-up, he had a joke in his set that he used the R word. And it was a road trip, and I said, hey, man, I love the joke. I was like, but there's so many words that joke isn't funny because you say the R word. And if you could just like tweak that or find a different word, I think it would. And he took the note right away and, never did it again. But I think as an elder statesman in at least the Montana, I'm Gandalf in Montana as far as comedy goes. We never in our scene we never say you can't go up because you offend people. But we will if somebody does go up and try to do a joke about a group that they're not a part of, or something that's just outdated and bullshit. Our response is to put a more seasoned comic up next to get the audience back and apologize, and when needed, to roast the person that was just up. So
and to make fun of is one of the best interventions.
Yeah.
And like there was a thing like I've seen, and I'm not going to mention names because it was a show of a Bay Area comic and I don't want to diss a Bay Area comic, but there was a feminist on his show, and then she went up against a comic as like a counterpoint thing.
Yeah.
Like, what a waste of a female comic to have that, because you have to meet comedy with comedy. You can't meet serious dialogue with comedy, and you have to make fun just as hard as harder and better than the person that you're trying to roast. And roast, I think, is a very affectionate word. This is more than a roast.
Yeah. And this, I've seen it work. Some comics will, if they get roasted hard enough, will just never come back. I think.
And your work there is done.
Yeah. One thing that I would give John credit for too, and I've definitely supported, is if somebody does abuse the stage that way, it's always met with an invitation to come to one of our writing groups or come into Base Improv. And, a lot of the comics they've showed up, and it's not to be lectured, it's to, hey, maybe you said that thing because you don't experience people. So here, come to this class once and see if you feel comfortable. It's kind of the unspoken lesson there. But yeah.
Well, that's so brave of you to do that.
Yeah. Well, we have tranquilizers on hand in case they do decide to act up. No?
That's a really good policy, I think. Okay, and the thing about Base that you didn't say that I want you to talk a little bit about is you had once told me that, like, if you have cool toys, people will just want to come. If you're a kid. Can you talk about how that applies here?
Yeah, I think, and it gets back to, God, we need to, can we? All right, let's, absent this, can we just find money so you and I can work together on these ideas that we have, that we get interrupted by our day job?
Yeah.
But I've been thinking a ton recently, I'd say in the last year, about the role of confidence in movements and in individuals. But I think, one thing that I think the disability rights and like systems lack is confidence. So I mean, we know how to take over a building, we know how to advocate for stuff, like that confidence is there. But there's an ADA t-shirt, and I probably have 6 of these, that say to boldly go where everyone else has gone before. And I think it can be a rallying cry. It can be a very positive thing. It certainly was a very, very good Kool-Aid when I first saw it. And that is to say, so, you know, an old building is cool, a museum is cool, but we don't have access to it. So our advocacy is to advocate for someplace everyone has already been, so we can be a part of that. But inherently, that thinking doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, because you're always asking to get invited to the party everybody's been at for 20 years. So you never really feel like it's yours. So part of what BASE tries to do is say, hey, we're not asking to be a part of something that already exists. We're making a space that's cool enough that you'll want to come join us. Able-bodied person or person that doesn't identify with disability directly. Like, this space will be cool enough that you'll want to. And I think that's really from, other minority groups I've heard. All it takes is one idea to be popular enough for you to start breaking those things down. And, you know, in a variety of fronts, I don't know that disability's done that mainstream. Like, we haven't had that mainstream thing that was popular that gives us that confidence to say, oh, this is, so I don't know, you know, like BASE is a very micro, and, you know, we've always been a big believer in there's something to be learned from it, even if it fails. Like, you know, BASE might not be, or this model might not be the thing, but the person that does do the thing will be able to do that because we tried this.
I don't think I told you this, but this past year I did a show and I was selling books afterwards, and this guy bought my book and he was like, oh yeah, it's my nephew does comedy in Missoula. And he said, oh, and he's this young kid who has a CP. I was like, I know that kid. I know. I was like, that's the cutest kid. I always say that is like the most adorable kid. I'm sure he's like, 12 now or something. But what's his name?
Heath Montgomery. He's been doing improv and stand-up since at BASE, or as a part of the Missoula scene since he was 6. And that's, the idea that that's his normal is to come in and, like, I can't imagine what that's like. And I'm sure you can't either, to have like a place to go at that age where you can experience those things.
Yeah. No. I was like, yeah, I know his parents and they're own this. And I started like, and it's just.
That guy's great.
Such a small world because we're connected this way.
He starts every fight in the wrestling group. Talking about somebody that's been talking shit since he was 6. Yes, we had to break out because over like Messenger, we were, people were chatting as their characters and talking smack back and forth. But there were people that had only met during COVID on this virtual format, so they never met each other in person. And he started talking smack to this one guy who'd never met him before, and it got really heated, and this guy ended up getting like really upset and saying some awful things to Heath too, but no idea he was talking to an 11-year-old. Until Heath was like, if you don't stop, I'm gonna get my dad. And he typed up. But yeah, he's a big fan of that guy.
Can you say a little bit about what it's like to do comedy in Montana?
Oh yeah, I mean it's great. The last the Renaissance period, I guess. So my first, I would say 10 years or almost 11 years of doing comedy. Um, I was the only working comic in my only one of two working comics that I knew of in the state. So it was me in Western Montana, and then there was another cat from Eastern Montana in the Billings area. So my education around comics was the ones that would come through on one night stands. So, we never had it. I think the closest comedy club was always Spokane, which is 3 hours away. So it was, we had one bar in Missoula for a long time that did comedy on Tuesdays, and it was two comics that were traveling, usually I-90 that started in Portland and did the Tribble runs, which were pretty famous comedies scenes. I don't know what. Yeah, I don't know how outside of the major areas. Like he was definitely the in and created a lot of opportunity, and still does. But yeah, I had to pay in college. I had to pay the cover to get into a Tribble show, and then convince the two comics to let me have 3 minutes ahead of them. And again, I had no idea why they were so enthusiastic. I was like, oh my God, everybody's so supportive and this is great. And a lot of people were, they're genuinely supportive. But a lot of them, it was like, yeah, I don't care if you suck, as long as you go up there for 3 minutes before I have to. So the feature wasn't doing a cold stage. So that was, how I did it until it got back to Tribble that this company called me. And he said, hey, are you Michael Beers? And I was like, yeah, this is Michael Beers. Like, I hear you've been stealing my stage time. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Tribble. Like, it's just, there's no place else. And he's like, you want to get paid for it? And I was like, yeah. So from the he's like, do you have 25? Because you have to have 25 minutes of good material. I don't want
And
5 minutes.
You had already had 20 from your first mic.
Yeah, I know. So that's how I got into getting paid, really. Then that was how I got.
Like you used to, because there weren't any open mics, you would go to karaoke night and find like the American Pie song.
Yeah,
you would just
it was whatever had the longest instrumental break, so I could use that instrumental break to test. I forgot I shared that. I haven't shared that with a lot of people, but yeah. And I do open mics that were music based. So you had to sign up for a half an hour spot instead of like the traditional. So, and it was in bars that no one shows up to a music open mic to sit and listen. And it was crowd noise and stuff.
A lot of girlfriends. I find those are a lot of the guys' good
I've never had the partner that sat in the front. Like I've had some partners that are very supportive and they like come and enjoy, but I never had this partner. Which is probably good.
It's a good thing. I think that says more about you than it does her.
No.
Because you don't need that thing.
I know. I was like, I would love to be this person though at the same time. But yeah, so I would say since 2012, John Howard, who I've brought up a few times, he graduated 2 years after I did from the same high school. And I find out years later that the first time he ever saw stand-up live was me doing my senior project set at the high school. So, and he says he met me. He said, after you did that, I saw you in the third floor bathroom. And I said hi to you. And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't remember, John, but thank you. But then we met up again in 2010. In 2012, he called me and said, hey, he started thinking about doing stand-up. And he did the Broadway a couple times when I wasn't around. But he, instead of taking the approach I did and going to karaoke, he said, well, there's no stage time. for comics. I'm going to create stage time for me to do this. So he met with a bar and got him to agree to do an open mic, comedy open mic in Missoula. And he knew how long I'd been doing it. And he texted me. He's like, will you come to this? And of course, it was one of those, like, when I met him again in 2010, it was a writing group that ended up being a bunch of comics that wrote down 2 ideas and then started drinking beer and getting high. And that's typical writing session at that.
Across the country.
Yeah, it's all good. That's one of the comedy through lines. And it was like, oh yeah, so we exchanged numbers, but again, it was me thinking I'm never really going to contact. So I didn't save who he was. So when he started texting me, he's like, "Will you come to this open mic? I'd really like," it's like I ignored it. I was like, and he kept going. I was finally. I showed up at one. It was the second month they did it, and I was in like hoodie, and I'd just been through a breakup. And I wanted to see what was going on. I did not want to perform at all. And this is me. This is me thinking I could be anonymous by putting a hoodie and like in the back.
At a comedy open mic.
One of John's superpowers is his lazy eye. Like he saw me right away, and without even he's like, he gave me 10 minutes. He's like, here, but just starting there with that open mic, it really became like John hit a vein. There was just so many people that had this ambition to just try or see what it was like. They weren't passionate enough about it to do it at a karaoke night or create their own space. But now that there was one, the scene really took off from there, and it's been great. There's different venues, 4 or 5 different venues that do monthly or weekly shows here in Missoula, and there's some great material that comes out of this part of the country. And as somebody that has traveled, and seen the scenes in other places, I think if you've only done it here and you grew up in Montana, like I certainly had this, there was always like, oh my God, someday maybe I'll be. It wasn't about being successful enough that you were being in LA. It was that you had to be a certain level of funny. Like they were funnier there in LA and New York and Chicago than I was, because I'm just in Missoula. But the more I started doing it and started seeing those, it's not that anybody from here is funnier than anywhere else in the country. It's just you reach a level and you're like, I had nothing to be afraid of. Like I'm not intimidated by what you're doing in LA or New York. And there's a good group of comics in Missoula working right now. Well, not right now because pandemic, but.
And that's actually a really good segue into what's going on in comedy now that we're in COVID and probably 8 weeks in quarantine, 7 weeks.
Yeah, I lost track. I was scratching on the wall for a little bit, but I lost track of that. I think 8 weeks. Yeah, it's a different time. I joke. I was like, there's one thing I've learned. It's that nothing I do is essential. Yeah. I don't know, and I don't think you and I've had a chance to talk. There's so much like creativity coming out of this. Like you go on Facebook and there's memes are such a popular expression now that weren't when I started doing comedy. But there's this immediate like stuff that's making me laugh and making me feel better. But I don't know that I look at it and I've said, God, I should be doing stuff like that. Like I should be using this time to come up with like the best topical, like what's my voice in all of this? But then that kind of gets taken over by the next thing you scroll down, and there's pain and confusion and fear and anger that just kind of drains that. For me, it drains that creativity. So I haven't written my COVID set or, put
And so let
material.
me ask this, as a disabled person and as a disabled activist, is that anger a little bit intensified because we're like, we can lose a few, and by losing a few, that means you. So
Yeah.
is that what it is?
Yeah, it's anger, but it's also, I think, if that's what you grew up in, like, it's kind of, I don't know if the analogy tracks, but, a lot of people in especially the African American community, woke people that haven't dealt with real oppression their entire lives will say, will almost, it seems, really enjoy talking about how much more racist we are since Trump got in office. But minorities will say, no, it's louder, it's more out there, but we haven't gotten more racist with this one person in office. We've been this racist for a long time. And you're, welcome to the conversation. But when as a person with a disability and as a Native American, I think we're more out loud and having the conversation that we're expendable and that this country has been trying to kill us, or at least doesn't care if we die. Mm-hmm. We're talking more about it in the last 8 weeks, but we've known that for a long time. Like, we've known that for hundreds of years, whether it's disability or, being Native. So there is the anger, but there's a certain sense of pride in that. And be like, Nina, they've been trying to kill us for hundreds of years. And we need to advocate against that. But at the same time, they have not been successful. And I think it gives us, and my dad put this in a very cool way, to my siblings and I, who we're all, mixed heritage. We're all Native and Irish and other things. But, he said, this is in your blood. The tools and ability to get through this are in you. They've just never had to be used before like this. But yeah, there's that aspect, but you can't get around that. And I've been surprised at how upfront people have been about, we're okay sacrificing a certain number of you. And none of those people are, they're not Thanos. They're worse than Thanos. Thanos, it was at least like, hey, I'm going to take 50% off, and I don't care who you are. But no, it's minorities. It's the weak link. Like, the people at the top don't want the weak. That's why they attack the weakest link and not the strongest link, because they're scared of the strong link. So yeah, and it's, as a comic and an advocate, I've been having a hard time figuring out. I can identify the issues and identify what's going on, but like, what's my voice specifically in this beyond like, and I think what I've done, there's calling your representatives, which I think is huge. If you can't think of anything else to do, call them and say every bit of legislation that has aid for fighting COVID has to include additional supports or consideration for how people with disabilities are going to be impacted by this. And just making people aware that they're okay. Yeah, they're okay with you dying.
You had mentioned that your dad said as someone who's Irish, as somebody who is Native American, as someone who is disabled, like the DNA, DNA has these tools that you can work on this. It's already in you. Can you tease apart what some of those tools are? And I think that it's at time because those two cultures, Native American and Irish, are both good at talking shit, and in a way that comes out of love.
Yeah,
is that one of them? And say more about that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because it's why you don't run into more stand-up comics that are Irish or Native. Like, I don't understand. Like, considering the role that humor plays in both those cultures, it seems.
I mean, George Carlin. I mean, come on.
George Carlin. Yeah. I can't think of it. Native comics would be right on that level of disabled comics. In that, like, I think within ourselves, we have people we point to and say, "Oh yeah, that person's wicked funny." But I don't think there's been that mainstream success. As far as tools, I mean, I had a white guy offer me a blanket the other day, and I was able to say no. That's not something we're gonna do anymore. And I think the adaptability is probably the biggest thing. It's like, I'm not going to waste my energy getting mad at something that, I would say, like, I'm not going to waste my energy thinking that this is oppression and, standing at a courthouse with an automatic weapon. I'm going to adapt because that's what I had. That's what got us through the last 10 crisis, the last 10 times where people actively tried to kill us or just didn't care if we died. We had to adapt. And there's a fine line between adapting and assimilation. And I think that's something you got to decide for yourself. But yeah, and I think as comics, I think that's what the approach I'm trying to move closer to, and I think you've inspired me a lot. You and Dave, with the amount of new things you're doing and the things you're putting out there right now as far as opportunities, because that's where you can't sit here and just dwell and like share like, oh yes, this does suck. We can't go do the 10 shows we were planning or the open mics we regularly do. Like, we have to be able to express how much that sucks. But the ones that are going to survive and maybe thrive are the ones that are going to accept I have to do what I want to do. I can still do what I love. I can still get that need met, but I have to be able to do it in a different way. And if you're not able to adjust, you're going to get left behind, or, you're going to have to find something else to do. So.
Where do you think the world is going to go in terms of, like, after COVID? Do you think our disability, no, I'm thinking ahead of myself. Do you think that our humor in our culture and world is going to change because of this shared experience, or do you think it'll just be shitty office jokes?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be some comfort in those things that are more timeless as far as humor and have nothing to do with, people are going to be saturated by the politics and the COVID material.
So dick jokes, you're saying dick jokes will always work.
Yeah, I find myself
latch on to their dick jokes.
Yeah, I find myself dabbling in fecal jokes more so than dick jokes as a timeless endeavor. But yeah, dick jokes. I hope we don't get back to a here, take my wife style of comedy. That's probably not where we need to go. But yeah, I think there'll be comfort in that timeless material, and also you got to be topical. But I think if you go out there saying, "Oh, I have to," like, yeah, I just don't have. It's kind of like Trump. I don't have a. I think I have like 2 minutes of material on Trump that I'm really I think is funny, but it hasn't been the well of material that people outside of comedy would look and say, "Oh yeah, this all sucks." But as a comedian, aren't you just getting a ton of material? And I think part of it is the pain plus time formula. Like, comedy's pain plus time. And Trump got elected almost 4 years ago, and I still haven't had enough time. And maybe COVID will be different. Maybe it'll, maybe I'll be happy being I'll be happy being in the audience for COVID material for a while. Because I don't have the material. Of course, I started doing comedy when Bush was president, so I kind of like, I got my fill of low-hanging fruit. I think to the point, Nina, I haven't thought about it till now. I might have an allergy to it. That's why I can't. I have an allergy to the low-hanging presidential fruit. Those were the days. OW.
Yeah. Is there anything that I should have asked you about? Anything in COVID there, or anything else that you can
add? My bulldog has something to add, apparently.
Yeah.
It's Nina. I know. He's upset because I can't walk him right now because of my surgery. But no, I can't think of anything. That was great. I didn't exactly know what I was getting in for, and I probably took way too long answering simple questions. But
well, I think the bulldog is saying that we're done.
Yeah.
But
that's what happens when advocates train a dog.
Yeah. Very loud one.
They become very vocal when they want something.
I just want to say, just to end this, is that like there are very few people in this world that I feel like are soulmates. I feel you are a soulmate because we just meet and converge in multiple ways, and I've just always appreciated that and felt very fortunate that I think I met you when I to the YLF in Montana.
You did, and I remember the second meeting more than the first one because we got a chance to talk. But it's funny to because we didn't meet until that YLF and a few months later. But I remember thinking when I saw you speak, I was like, I know you. I had never met you, but there was a feeling like I know that person. So
it's very natural.
And especially at the conference, I couldn't wait to like after your presentation to just like sit down and be like, oh my gosh, I need to talk to this person.
Well, and also previously to meeting you, I was doing a bunch of open mics around Montana. Yeah. And people were like, "Oh, you have to meet Beers," and I started getting really like it was just like, you know how like sometimes as a female comic people are like, "Oh, you should meet this other person. Yeah. You guys are really going to be friends." Yeah. Like, oh, the two disabled people have to meet. Well, they were all right. Like I was like I'm just being really defensive, saying like, oh yeah, the disabled people have to meet. No, they were totally right. So I take it.
I remember talking to some of the people before I met you at the YLF. They were like, I was like, how have you been? And they're like, oh, we did this open mic, and there's this lady from Oakland that we told her about you, but you have to meet her. And then you happen to be the YLF keynote speaker.
There it was. All right, Mike, I will talk to you soon. I appreciate this and miss you. Don't walk your dog. Stay in.
You.
Okay?
All right.
All right.
Love you.
Take care.